Africans and citizens of the United States of America. Today we come together to mark what is undoubtedly one of the most tragic occasions in the short life of post-apartheid South Africa. It ranks with a terrible episode in our democratic history when fellow Africans a few years ago faced the fury of the poorest South Africans who singled them out as the cause of their daily misery and for days unleashed untold violence of African against African. But today I speak of the violence at the London platinum mines in Marikana. I speak of the death of 44 miners and 2 police officers. I speak of the terrible manner of their deaths, and I speak of the shock that reverberates across our country, the African continent, and indeed the world. Today, we stand here in the company of those from the anti-apartheid movement, leaders and activists who sacrificed for South Africa to be free. They marched, they urged disinvestment, they were arrested, and they lobbied the US government for our freedom in South Africa, for democracy in South Africa, and for all people in our country to enjoy the opportunity and the possibility of a better life, a more equal life, and a life lived humanely. They are here with us today because, indeed, our tragedy is their tragedy. Our faltering steps to that more equal and more humane society are their faltering steps. And our aberrations from these noble objectives are aberrations which also detract from their ability to hold South Africa up as a mirror to their own society and societies across the world which too strive for greater equality and for humanity. Today, we gather in a place of worship. We speak today in the format provided by a liturgy. We intersperse our human words with the words shaped in prayer and emanating from the soul. We petition a higher wisdom with the rhythms of hymns which better convey our unspoken emotions. And we evoke the divine because we fear that at this moment the human may be too vulnerable, too judgmental, too angry, and too bitter to make sense of the tragedy of Marikana. There has to be, and there will be, a time when we must know who is responsible. There has to be, and there will be, a time when we must know why lethal arms and live ammunition were used. There has to be, and there will be, a time when we must know the truth behind of the mine workers and longmen for improved conditions of service. There has to be, and there will be, a time when we will answer the many political questions which trouble us today. But today, we gather to pause and reflect, to grieve and to mourn, to understand and to commit. We pause because we cannot simply continue with the business of life when this wound is so raw and the fabric of our South African identity is in danger of fraying. We reflect because we need to measure whether the scars of our apartheid victimhood is in danger of making us victimizers and perpetrators of the very horrors that we endured during that dark era. We need to grieve the violence at Marikana and assert that in a democratic dispensation, violence must never displace the hard-won right to express yourself, to engage in dialogue and negotiation, and to find the compromises that echo the very birth of a free South African people. We need to mourn the dead by affirming that their lives are infinitely more valuable than all the platinum that lie under the hills of Marikana. We need to commit that these tragic events will not define who we are and are not indications of how we will proceed to our future. We need to commit that this is not the shape of our relations amongst ourselves and with fellow Africans. We need to commit that our police will learn better methods of enforcement and our unions better methods of engagement. But we also need to understand that the tenuous agreements of the early 1990s that have glued together our fractured nation may be weakened when we do not reinforce the patience of the poor with generosity from the rich. The inequality in our society, inherited at the dawn of freedom, is only tenable when it is overshadowed by the promise of a better and more equal life for all. It is only tenable when everyone is seen to be chipping away at the mountain of poverty to build the edifice of a shared prosperity. Anything less will lose us the vital ingredients of patience and trust, and will invite the undesirable and unsustainable prospect of enforcement and coercion as the means of our engagement. If ever the call for a second transition has been amplified, it is now from the hills of Marikana. This transition requires that the successful political transition be reinforced with a greater effort at an economic transition, that the progress towards healing the cleavages between black and white not be replaced by the cleavages between rich and poor, and that the achievement of putting in place a social safety net must be complemented with the enduring investment in every South African's human capacity through skills and the opportunity to fulfill their full potential. The second transition is vital, but it is not only a governmental and societal responsibility. It's a wake-up call to those who flaunt their possessions in the face of great poverty. It is a call also to the global community that only tragedy awaits us along the path of seeking greater profit margins at the expense of the remaining variable of production, labor. In a haste to reach for political language, we may miss these deep philosophical questions that are appropriate to ask at this moment. It is a pity sometimes that our willingness to reflect took so many unnecessary lives at Marikana, but the best we can do to give some sense to the senselessness and some meaning to the meaninglessness is to understand these deaths as a sacrifice that came to show us that too much fancy political language must now yield to the deep questions that must now guide our second transition, so that we can address the remaining challenges of our nation and hold up the lessons to establish democracies, whether like in the United States or emerging democracies across Africa and the Middle East. May the victims of Marikana find the next world more comforting than this one was for them. May the families and friends find comfort in the global outpouring of sorrow. May the injured recover from their injuries, and may our nation's healing begin. Most importantly, may our leaders gather their wisdom to guide us through their tragedy and chart a new course that will make the future one that avoids unnecessary tragedies as we go forward.